Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast with Kate Riga. When we generally do these podcasts pretty free form. The way our kind of work process works is that Kate usually comes up with, kind of two or three bullet points, like, okay, we're going to talk about these things, right? And besides that, there's no script or anything like that, and you can probably tell by the way I talk that there's no script and there's no ums and stuff like that written down on some document. But in any case, news changes quickly. And just as we were getting ready to press record, we got this news of this hiccup with the Hunter Biden plea deal. And then we were on hold or kind of sidetracked for 15 or 20 minutes trying to figure out what was going on, and we still haven't quite figured out what was going on. So because it's sort of an unclear story. You probably, listening to this a bit later, you're going to have a better sense of what happened than we did. But it's just sort of an example of how we have to roll with the news as it unfolds. And the best I can understand here, you know, the initial alerts were Hunter Biden plea deal falls apart, judge rejects Hunter Biden plea deal. Neither of those seem to be true. One of them could have been true, but was not, because now they seem to have, at least based on what we could pull together on the fly, that they have finalized the plea deal. The judge never rejected it. At least my current understanding, is that the judge posed a hypothetical to both parties, and that hypothetical is Hunter Biden immunized from other potential crimes, or not future crimes. No one's immunized from future crimes, but other things that might be investigated. And she explicitly included as a hypothetical potential foreign representation of foreign governments. And this has been kind of the hobby horse of Republicans, that this is not, that this was not covered. And now, an additional wrinkle to this is that the judge is a Trump appointee, but appears to be a Trump appointee. And again, all of this is very provisional because we've just kind of put this together on the fly. Appears to be one of these Trump appointees where where the parties will come to a deal, kind of like, all right, you want this one person, and we'll approve that person if you give us, basically a Democratic judge. So the judge is a Trump appointee, but may not be a Trump appointee in the way that is in the way we normally understand what that means. So in any case, the judge asked this, and is Hunter Biden immune for other crimes besides what we're talking about here? And the prosecutor said no, and the Biden lawyer said, "What the fuck?" Deals off, basically. And we got into a whole conversation here with my co-host Kate Riga, and actually our Joe Ragazzo is stepping in for Jackie Wilhelm, our producer this week, since Jackie is away. In any case, so we're trying to parse this, figure it out, and the way that plea deals generally work is you have something the government is investigating you for, and you make a deal and say that, okay, I'm going to plead to this thing, and that's it for this investigation. That's closed out. I have finality. And that's why you have a plea deal. You plead to some things that you might not be convicted of to get certainty and closure on the whole thing. Now, uh, it's never the case that a plea deal immunizes you from crimes that the prosecutors didn't even know about, right? If you're coming to a plea deal on tax stuff and it turns out you killed someone, that's not, you're not, the plea deal doesn't cover that. And it certainly doesn't cover things that might happen in the future. And generally, a plea deal is able to capture that distinction in the way it's structured. And so, what happened here? This idea that does it cover everything wasn't new. This came up right at the very beginning because the DOJ put out a statement from the prosecutor that kind of said in passing that the investigation continues. And the right kind of seized on that and said, aha, it's not over. We're still investigating Hunter Biden. And others kind of generally dismissed it because if the whole thing's still ongoing, why are you pleading out? Right? That doesn't quite make sense. So the judge brings this up, it causes this. Now as we were trying to figure this out on the fly, it turns out that the two sides reconvened and did a revised plea deal. And this one covers generally the years in question that we've known about. And it covers tax offenses, drug use, and gun possession, which are the specific things that seem to be being investigated. It does not cover potential foreign representation. Now, I think that probably means that the Biden people have some relative confidence that they're not really in jeopardy over that. Um, I'm not sure why you would basically continue with the same deal if you thought you were. And if you thought you were in jeopardy, I think this distinction would have already been litigated in the colloquial sense of the word. In any case, that's where that is. You're probably going to know more than we do because there will be subsequent reporting and these things will probably get hashed out. In general, there was Kate was telling me because I think she was dipping into the Twitter rightosphere as all this was happening, and the conservatives are I don't know, it would be sort of like if someone if there was a news story that came out a month after Trump's election in 2016, suddenly it's like, hey, Hillary might have won. You'd have every Democrat getting on there and like, I don't know, what do you do when all your hopes that were dashed are suddenly restored? So in any case, my general sense on these kind of things is, I mean, look, Hunter Biden was out there for like 5 or 6 years in the period basically after his brother died, doing like tons of drugs and trying to make tons of money like everywhere. And if he broke the law, then he should be accountable for it. I'm totally fine with that. I have pretty high confidence just because I have a sense of who he is that I don't think this stuff touches Joe Biden, which has always been, I think, the sort of the larger reality. And frankly, if it really does touch Joe Biden, if Joe Biden actually runs the Biden crime family, right, and this stuff is all true, then he should be accountable too. I think there's, that should be obvious, but I think there's, generally this sense that a lot of people kind of live within the drama of the Republican investigations world, and frankly, I've seen enough of these over like a quarter century that I kind of know how they work. Um, and I kind of choose not to do that. So that's where we are on the Hunter Biden thing. Aside from that, we're basically going to talk about Ron DeSantis and you know his what is it? The sort of the ongoing bleeding out of his campaign. Yesterday, they fired a third of their staff because they're running out of money. And one of those they fired. I was going to say that they fired a third of their staff because they decided to fire all the active Nazis on their staff. But in fact, it seemed to have been mainly budgetary. But they did fire this one guy, Nate Hochman. I think I've got that right. Hochman. He's one of these. I have a post that I'm gonna put up after we're done recording the pod, and we record the pod, you know, right around noon on Wednesdays, and part of this larger story of there's kind of a GOP operative class, guys under 30, often under like 25, who we're learning that a very large percentage of these guys who kind of present publicly as, you know, edgy young conservative men, which already is a few red flags, kind of packaged in, even into that. But it turns out they've all had their political awakening basically in the sort of the far right, racist incel message board, edge lord Twitter world, where, racist memes and anti-Semitism and all of these kind of like weird visual signifiers that you see in DeSantis, um, DeSantis videos all come from. And so it's sort of another example of that. Anyway, we're going to talk about that. There is a lot to get into with the fall of Mr. Ron. But before we do that, let me remind you that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. If you're looking for the perfect cup of iced coffee, it's got to be cold brew. True enough. Cold brew makes iced coffee that's smooth, less acidic, and way too easy to sip on all day long. And if you want the very best cold brew, it's got to be Grady's. The secret to their uniquely smooth cold brew is chicory. Chicory gives Grady's cold brew its distinct flavor, rich, slightly nutty, and even a little chocolatey. It also lends a subtle sweetness for a well-balanced glass that doesn't need milk or sugar. And with Grady's beanbag bundle, you can make it at home for less than $1 a glass. If you're ready to give it a swirl, get 25% off at Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. Again, that's Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. Okay, Kate Riga, what are we? How did we survive that Hunter Biden plea deal little boomlet there we had?
Yeah, I mean, it's really good news for every kind of right wing media apparatus who now has their A, B, C, and D block for the day kind of filled out. Yeah, it was just crazy kind of scrolling through, and, Twitter or X or what have you is so unusable now that I was just kind of trying to find, what Twitter used to be great for, which is breaking news before, reporters have time to put it into copy, just kind of telling you what's going on. But now, because the arbitrary blue checks get boosted, and those are all pretty much kind of like right wing Elon Musk fanboys, all the stuff that gets pushed to the top is like, a picture of the judge and saying she's not suicidal, presumably for when Joe Biden murders her. The cushy sweetheart deal has fallen apart. Like, Hunter, we're coming to get you. It's just like so completely useless right now. But anyway, big celebration over there, even if it does end up just being kind of a more pedestrian, narrowed plea deal, or more a plea deal that has its parameters more explicitly defined. You can feel pretty confident that it's going to go down as a massive vindication for, the kind of leagues of people who hate Hunter Biden on the right. And it is kind of crazy how their fixation with him, it really has developed into like the current day Benghazi. It's mentioned in every news package that, Fox News airs, is kind of, and it's all, since it's so conspiratorial and so kind of smoke, not fire, it's really easy to pull on a new quote unquote thread, or a new person who says he knows Hunter Biden or whatever. It's just like there's so many permutations that you can kind of squeeze out of it. And they clearly kind of like the fact that on top of the, whatever impropriety and the crimes that he pled guilty to, they also kind of like that he is a mess or has been a mess, and that that's embarrassing for the president and hard for his um place in the spotlight. And we have like a rich tradition of this in America, right? Of like finding kind of the most troubled relative of the president and putting a huge spotlight on them and trying to make the president uncomfortable by having to kind of answer for this person, regardless of the fact that they're usually just a private citizen and have really nothing to do with their relative's decision to seek higher office. But, you know, every every week that elapses between the pod, there's more kind of Republican Hunter Biden stuff going on, whether that's like Marjorie Taylor Greene showing, porn in a congressional hearing to try to embarrass him, or, I don't know if you remember when they got their hands on that voicemail that Joe Biden had left for Hunter saying like that he loved him and he's worried about him and he just wants him to call, which everyone was kind of like, oh wow, you caught him being a good guy, but yeah.
There is that um, a sort of a sub theme in this whole saga of Republicans are so deep into the Hunter Biden alternative universe that a dad sort of reaching out to an obviously pretty troubled son, um, and just saying, "Hey, I love you," you know, that's like, oh my god, this is
Right.
going to blow it all open. When kind of like, I do think, I mean, it is funny because we've certainly seen, there was a sort of a boomlet a few weeks ago where I think it was that he invited Hunter to the state dinner with the Prime Minister of India. And various reporters got quotes from like Hill Democrats, like, what is he doing? Oh my God, what's Biden's problem? I do think in general, for a lot of people, um, this is one of the things they like about Biden. It makes him, I think, it makes him pretty relatable, right? I mean, we all love our kids and we love them uh, in a way that transcends their shortcomings, which is true of loving anybody, right? I mean, it's loving someone means you have a bond and you care about them in a way that is not just a kind of a you know weighing on the scales their merits and demerits, right? People can relate to that, and I think as a general matter, uh, uh, you know, that is something that I think people trust about Biden. Not that it's relevant to them necessarily. They're not his kid, right? They didn't I don't know, go on like a 3-year coke binge or whatever. Um, but it's relatable and makes them think that Biden's basically a solid guy, even if obviously being too solicitous of your loved ones can be a negative sometime, even for them, right? But it is weird because you see again and again Republicans basically saying, "Oh, Joe Biden says he loves his son. Nice going, Joe." Right?
I do wonder if Joe Biden ever has any regrets about choosing to run, seeking the presidency, kind of knowing what it would put Hunter through for the duration. I mean, that was something that this is not so much political punditry as it is emotional punditry, but this is something that we knew he was aware of when he was like thinking about running, that it would be kind of, hopefully for him, 8 years of unmitigated hell for like one of his, surviving family members. I don't know. I wonder if that is It's kind of the other side of the coin of what you're talking about. I wonder if that wears on him.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Just at least based on the sense I have of him, which obviously is not based on any personal knowledge, just the kind of information that we all have access to. I do think one thing that is pretty critical is that they did not know that they would have access to this laptop, the pictures, the emails, and the emails are nothing I've seen that speaks to the president, but does speak a lot to what Hunter Biden was doing. And they're like sex stuff and drug stuff, and we've continued to have. I continue to be highly confident that this was a an illegal operation, quite likely a foreign based operation. Because look at what we are look at the story as presented. The story as presented is that Hunter Biden was so cracked out and off his rocker that he took his laptop into for repair into a repair shop, and without any real documentary evidence that he actually brought his laptop into such into such a store, and he happened to have the bad luck to bring it into a store whose owner would crack open the hard drive and just start looking through the stuff, and then call up Rudy Giuliani and ask him if he was interested. That has always struck me as a bit of a stretch. It's not impossible. He certainly was not in great condition. Maybe he brought it in, but I don't think that's particularly likely, especially with what we saw back in 2016. And we've had this long ongoing debate about was it disinformation or not. Well, if you go back to what happened in 2016, really kind of the biggest thing that happened was that some Russian military intelligence people hacked the DNC uh, email system and then just slowly leaked it out. Now, as far as we know, all those emails were real. It wasn't completely known at the time whether they were all authentic. But the fact that, and I think we still get conflicting reports about whether fake stuff is intermixed with the Hunter Biden stuff. But generally speaking, I assume that all the things, all the emails we hear about and stuff are real, and like the photos, unless we're talking about some deep fake stuff, is real. But in any case, my digression and my interrupting you that I apologize for is to make the point that yes, obviously Joe Biden knew that his son was in a rough patch, but they wouldn't necessarily know that was going to happen. And I continue to think that someone either digitally or physically broke into Biden's stuff and stole the stuff, and then somehow through one way or another sort of backfilled it into this story of dropping off the laptop and then never coming to never coming to pick it up. So that they didn't know, although frankly, after 2016, maybe they should have.
Yeah. So let's talk about the kind of spectacular collapse of Ron DeSantis's campaign, wherein they're using this really nifty political strategy of kind of extending this bloodletting over multiple news cycles instead of doing it all at once. They're instead choosing to kind of parcel it out to make sure that every um, little piece kind of gets its own flurry of headlines. And the big one this week was, as you said in the intro, Josh, that they're laying off a third of the staff, including some kind of like, you know, more senior members, not just the kind of, lowest rung type people. Um, and those stories have come with just a glut of details that make DeSantis look stupid and flailing. Like you wrote a post about this, but we have found out that the candidate and his wife almost exclusively travel by private jet. That's what they prefer.
And who
So that
wouldn't, right?
right.
Other people's money, right? Yeah.
So that obviously runs up quite a tab. They kind of having a retreat in like Deer Park where the facilities look super nice and top tier. You also kind of have what was going to be an issue for him from the beginning in terms of money, which is all of that initial boost that kind of came on the heels with his big performance in Florida. All of those were like big donor people. And the problem with big donations is that people get maxed out quite quickly and then they can't make that kind of a recurring revenue stream. So once you've and there's a limited pool of people with that kind of money who are going to give to a Republican candidate who are not on the Trump train, right? That's
Right.
going to be a self selecting world. And he has not so far fared well at all with kind of the smaller donors that are the lifeblood for a campaign, kind of in between these big infusions of money. So all of that's kind of coming to a head at the same time. And whenever you have a story like this, you inevitably have, the kind of anonymous donor quotes of like either the candidate is kind of messing everything up for himself or the campaign is leading him astray and they just got to let Ron be Ron kind of thing. And every time we've had these kind of bloodletting stories of late, they've been accompanied with and now the campaign's going to do a heel turn and we have a whole new strategy now and it's going to change everything. And, I think as we discussed last time, that ended up being like an interview with Jake Tapper. That was the big kind of reversal. Um, and what you're seeing now is kind of some of DeSantis's support is starting to peel off and go to these other people. And I kind of predict we're about to have a flurry of like, wow, Vivek Ramaswamy was a more viable candidate than we thought, or another round of the kind of like Tim Scott question mark, because they're like starting to inch up in the polls. But most of that is just coming from what DeSantis is shedding, which most importantly means that no one is really touching Trump at all, right? He continues to be in most of these early states like 30, 40 points ahead the rest of the pack. And then all you have left to talk about is kind of like DeSantis is down from 27% to 22%, and then that 5% has kind of redistributed to the also rans,
Like Tim
right?
Scott or someone like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Or
Yeah.
this Vivek guy
Yeah, who
who's,
I
yeah.
I didn't realize the extent of his deep pockets. Like, he's loaded, so he's probably gonna stay in for a while, just kind of self-funding all the way.
Right. I mean, my sense is that uh he's a tech guy who had a few good, a few good exits from companies. So my sense is he's someone who might be worth $50 million or maybe 100 million. I mean, he's not a billionaire, um, but the kind of candidate who can, chip in $1 million a few times, and that's obviously a pretty big deal. And it seems like, I mean, one of the things that these kind of candidates often have, and by these kind of candidates who have no political background, no electoral political background, who no one expects much from, that you're generally running a pretty lean campaign. And the kind of things that make you not run a lean campaign, like if you're a DeSantis and, set aside if you're spending half of it on private jets, but the reason why, the quote unquote serious candidates can't run a lean campaign is it's not just a matter of getting booked on Fox. You've got to be setting up ground games in Iowa, in South Carolina, in New Hampshire, and setting up a fundraising, all these kind of things. But if you're someone like him, you're probably never actually going to amount to much. So you don't have to do that kind of stuff. You just have to get on Fox a lot and fly around the country and do some, show up at some diners. So you can do quite a lot with a few $1,000,000 if you're running that kind of campaign. I mean, who couldn't
Right.
do a lot with a few $1,000,000? It's a lot of money.
Mhm. Totally. And then one of the kind of issues with DeSantis now is we're just starting to get late in the cycle in terms of how much runway you have to kind of like stumble a lot and then get yourself back on track. The first primary debate is in about a month, and DeSantis has now been out there for a long time,
A good 6 months of de
right.
facto campaigning.
Exactly. And kind of historically, there have been times where a candidate really stumbles or spends money badly in the beginning and then kind of gets their sea legs back. I feel like John McCain is probably one of the biggest examples of that
And John
in
Kerry,
recent
actually,
history.
too.
Yeah,
John Kerry, 4 years early in 2004, was really kind of left for dead late in 2003, and as we know, became the nominee.
that's a really good point. But kind of, I, especially with McCain and probably to some extent with Kerry, it's like when you're at that point, the candidate themselves has to carry a lot of the weight because the stuff you've been doing up till this point, like it didn't work, right? The whatever your ad campaign was or whatever your kind of media strategy, it just didn't work. And McCain in particular is like kind of a historically good political communicator. That's kind of always been his bread and butter, that people just like him and they think he's funny and whatever. Now with DeSantis, harder personality based lift at this point, and he also doesn't really have the fallback anymore of being like, well, I'm still introducing people to who I am, because as you say, it's been like 6 months, so people pretty much know who he is. And we keep getting all these quotes about, well, we're going to do a heel turn, we're going to do a pivot. And it's just kind of like, pivot to what? Because the fundamental problem with DeSantis's candidacy has been the same since you and I started talking about him a million months ago, which is he can't or won't go after Trump in any kind of big way. Yet he's also trying to make the case that he is the preferable option to Trump. And that has manifested in him kind of like running to Trump's right on a whole bunch of stuff. And then also saying, but I'm the electable version of Trump, while at the same time,
And also no drama. No
right, the
drama.
the no drama Trump, who also at the same time won't talk about Trump's legal problems or indictments or frame those as any kind of a shortcoming for his biggest competitor, instead saying, this is the weaponized DOJ or whatever, and kind of coming to Trump's aid. So it's just like, what pivot can you make when you still have no argument, or you refuse to make the one that would probably give you at least some kind of chance of something, which is I'm the real politician. I'm not going to do all the tomfoolery thing. And
I'm
then
not a
you've got,
criminal.
right. And you've got
I'm
your
not
candidate
indicted.
being indicted like 4 times. And you're just like, nah, I'm not going to touch that.
Yeah, I mean, it is, people have brought up, as you did rightly, John McCain, who, my precise recollection isn't perfect, but in late 2007, he did have to lay off a bunch of staff. He kind of he was having funding problems. As we know, John McCain also had this fairly conflicted relationship with his own party. It's kind of it was denied later on, but he did kind of consider switching parties early early in Bush's first term. He had sort of made his brand about the sort of the straight talk and kind of having these little pet issues like campaign finance reform that were out of sync with his own party. But the thing that the I think what is different about McCain and John Kerry is that there was a reason why it seemed kind of crazy when their campaigns cratered, which is that they were seen as like maybe not likely nominees, but definitely two or three people who were probably going to be the nominee. They were front runners. So the fact that they were going nowhere seemed pretty surprising. They also had long public careers on the national stage. Um, and they had fundraising networks, all of these kind of things. And so they had something to fall back on. And they had, I'm not sure you'd say, I mean, John McCain had a fan base, there's no question. And he had different kinds of fan bases in both parties. I'm not sure you can say John Kerry had a mass fan base, but he definitely had a brand and a following in his party. And what you see with DeSantis is he really doesn't have any of that. And it's always one should always be very skeptical when you hear something like what I'm about to say coming from someone who doesn't like the person that he's talking about. No one likes the guy. And don't take my word for it. Just look around. He was not well liked when he was in Congress. He is one of the things that came out in this, in the recent news revelations and the staff cuts about financial problems and stuff like that, is that his brain trust is kind of like him and his wife, and that is kind of the every candidate has the inside group, right? And that seems to be his inside group, and the people who are running the campaign manager, a lot of the very top people, many of them are people who have very little political background aside from being with the DeSantises. And they're people who seem to, that Ron, and I believe his wife's name's Casey DeSantis, that those two trust. And that is, the sort of the circle of trust or whatever. But what that means is, again, that's not it all kind of fits together. Not terribly well liked in Congress, does not have like a big network of friends. That is hard. And then you add what you were discussing, which is that the premise of his campaign was frankly always basically absurd. Didn't really make any sense. And this is why here I'm going to brag really hard. I was saying like 6 months ago, this campaign is dead. It's never going to go anywhere. And it was because the premise was just absurd. It's a Trump party. Everyone loves Trump. And that's the sort of the foundational thing, right? Because now he's, what is his problem? The problem isn't just that he's falling in the polls and he's kind of handing off some support to Vivek or Tim Scott. He's still like way behind Trump. So where is he even in here? I mean, the other candidates seem to be there. I mean, never quite gets stated. They seem to be there on the off chance, and probably Mike Pence to a great degree. They're there on the chance that Trump either dies or gets hit by criminal indictments that are so overwhelming and you can't even believe it, that they knock him out of the campaign. Or perhaps even one of our colleagues, Kate, kind of pressed me on this idea of a Trump plea deal. And at first I was like, dude, what are you smoking? Like, what? like what? That's never going to happen. But as I was talking to this colleague of ours, they kind of opened me up to it a little more than I thought, which is, let's say we're all kind of waiting for the January 6th indictment right now, right? Maybe it looks really bad. And the Trump lawyers talk to him, or Trump talks to himself and says, I could do serious jail time here. And sure, as many of us have discussed, his real argument is I'm going to win the election, and then I'm just going to pardon. If not, he doesn't. The reality is he doesn't have to pardon himself. He will run the Justice Department. So you just vacate the charge. I mean, there's a bunch of different paths to it, but the president runs the Justice Department, and the Justice Department can make the charges go away, even make the convictions go away if he really wants to, if they're convictions. But the point is Trump gonna have a point in the middle of 2024 where he looks at this and says, okay, I'm probably going to spend a significant amount of time in jail unless I win this election. Like, how confident am I that I'm going to win this election? Again, I still find it impossible to believe that he pleads out, but that scenario was a little made me question that maybe a little more than I might have. I don't even know how I got on this tangent, Kate, but can you rescue me from it?
Well, yeah, and I think there's one thing you were talking about how there's, like, some amount of people who are in the field just kind of, like you say, waiting for
Oh,
Trump
right.
to die or
Literally or
implode.
figuratively. Yeah.
Exactly. And then I think you also have these people intersect in that Venn diagram as well, but they're also the ones who are hoping that if he doesn't die literally or figuratively, that they might get vice president or some other kind of administration thing. So it's kind of like no skin off their back either way,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, totally.
Um, but kind of speaking of the rest of the field, we got new polls this week that solidified a certain number of people who will definitely make that late August first primary debate. And it's what we've seen in past cycles, but it's like a combination of a certain polling threshold plus a certain donation threshold in terms of, like enough individual donors contributing to your campaign, which has led to some wild and I can't believe are legal tactics to get more of these donors. Like Doug Burgum in particular is like giving out gift cards if people donate to his campaign. Um, and some people are trying to do like a
Isn't that a straw donor problem?
that
I mean, it
that's what
really
I thought
yeah.
too.
I
But I
guess
guess
it's so original that people just
yeah,
can't
they
quite
just
get their
don't
heads
know
around
yet.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so the people who have qualified for this first debate so far are Trump, DeSantis, Ramaswamy, Haley, Scott, and delightfully Chris Christie, which is gonna,
That's
just
good.
make this
I
required
would have I
viewing.
would have donated to Chris Christie just to get him over the hump.
You're not the first liberal I've heard
Yeah,
say
no,
this.
totally. I wanna see him
Um,
in that thing.
and then so far we have, oh my god, in the most like womp womp sad trombone thing you've ever heard is that Mike Pence has not yet made the stage. And neither has Doug Burgum, which is like a little bit less pathetic because, who's Doug Burgum?
Who is Doug Burgum?
Um,
But you said before we got started that Pence, it's on the donor side that he's
correct.
still not quite there.
Right, because
Because
Burgum
in
has
polls,
his gift card scheme going, so he's
I
fine.
really I really wonder about. I mean, I guess since eh, it's a stretch, since presumably the gift cards aren't, gift card that will be adjusted to the size of your donation, but
Right.
still, it's pretty. I've. We got to make a note to sort of come back. I mean, because
Yeah,
it's at least questionable.
the others are doing things that are a little less ludicrous, like selling a sticker for $1 or something, you know what I mean? That sounds a little more on the up and up. But yeah, like you said, Pence is in on the polling threshold, but not on the donations threshold. Burgum is in for donations and not yet for polling. And of course, for Pence, it's just the kind of thing where it was like, dude, this was the former vice president of the United States. He's got near universal name recognition. What are you doing here, man? Like he's gonna have to do you remember what they did last time when it was like the undercard debates for the people who like didn't
Oh
make the
yeah.
big boy
Wait,
debate?
was that on the Republican and the Democratic
I
side
think
last time?
so.
I think it was too. I think it was
Because I
too.
remember Chris Christie in particular kept like bouncing up and down, like to the upper card and the lower card. debates.
It's funny because on the one hand, it's kind of sad and demeaning. On the other hand, um, if you're holding 40%, you shouldn't be up there with someone at 2%.
Right.
Who knows? But
Yeah. So it's going to be, I'm so fascinated to see what Chris Christie does because, like, obviously, the way he's getting so much freaking CNN airtime right now is because he keeps going on and being like, well, I'm going to bring it to Trump. I'm the only one who's not scared of him. And, like, to some degree, that's probably true. But we've also seen the kind of like pit bull version of Chris Christie before who kind of goes into these things saying he's going to go for the king kind of thing and then like settles for a jester. Obviously we have he like his Rubio spats back then. He has demonstrated an ability to kind of get sidetracked, and I think when he gets in this like pugilistic attitude to just kind of like fire indiscriminately at people around him. So we'll see kind of how honed his strategy is
yeah.
if DeSantis falls into this net as well.
Well, that was the funny thing about Rubio is that uh, at the time, I think at the time and also in retrospect, it seems like maybe he was already kind of in league with Trump,
Mhm.
right?
That's
So
true.
maybe it wasn't an accident,
Yeah,
right? That he need that he needed to go after Rubio, and I think at least there was a significant period of time when it wasn't yet clear if Trump was the king,
that's true.
right? And I'm a little so there's a lot of there's a lot of weird variables that at least for me are sort of hard when we look back at it to figure out exactly what was going on. And he did go after Trump a bit. I mean, obviously, he spent most of the Trump administration as like a loyal,
Yep.
and then there was the whole thing. He was running the Trump transition. I mean, he then humiliated himself as a total Trump fanboy, basically. But it it is a you know there's no I mean one reality is, and when you got 7 or 8 people up there, they're not just handing Chris Christie the microphone for the entire thing just to go off on Trump, right? He's probably only got 1 or 2 openings, right? Because at least notionally, you're getting asked a question. You get asked like, Chris Christie, is it true that you're going to shut down all the bridges when you become president? And then you turn around and just attack Trump. So you don't necessarily get that many chances. But the other thing is, I there's no doubt in my mind that if he could buy a little more debate airtime, Chris Christie would like to also go after Ron DeSantis, just because Ron DeSantis is such a dweeb, right? Not because he has any interest in going after Ron DeSantis, but just because he's such an unlikable dude. He would just like to disembowel him, just as long as he's just as long as he's out on safari, right? He'd like to take him out too. But it is interesting because certainly everybody else up there goes into that thinking Ron DeSantis has to die for my campaign to live. Obviously, I'm speaking metaphorically. So, presumably, if Trump even shows up, which is not at all clear,
Yeah.
and in a way, it kind of makes perfect sense for him not to show up
Why would
because,
he?
yeah, why would he show up? I mean, he's gonna show up and give Chris Christie a chance to attack him. I don't think Trump cares all that much about that, but whatever. Um, but by not showing up, he just makes it into a Ron DeSantis pinata contest,
Mhm.
right? Because everybody, no one there besides Chris Christie, who's made it his brand, has any interest in attacking Trump. Again, remember, they're in the Trump dies group, literally or figuratively, and they just want to go against DeSantis. And it, when you're riding high in a campaign and you get into a debate, it's like that, and it's like that. You can always explicitly or tacitly basically say, as everybody's firing, as you're getting incoming from everybody, you kind of say, hey, I guess this was what it's like to be the king. Everybody's coming at the king, right? Shows that I'm the big cheese. But when you're not the big cheese and you're like flailing and your campaign is dying, you can't do that, right? It becomes sort of like a Lord of the Flies thing, as
Yeah.
all of the mean kids with their psychopathology coming to the fore are attacking the weak, helpless guy. So it's more like maybe Ron DeSantis shouldn't show up, or he needs. I don't know. I mean, because it is kind of hard to imagine at this point, to me, Trump showing up, because I just can't understand why he would. I mean, like 3 or 4 months ago, you might have said he's got to deal with DeSantis, and it's such an opportunity for him to kind of humiliate DeSantis. But at this point, does Trump even care about DeSantis? I don't think so.
Yeah. And I mean, it's what the point of doing something like this, like the upside is if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of name recognition, you're going to like get your name and your face out there. If you're an agile speaker, this is going to be a good showcase for you. But Trump is like the most overexposed human in the world. So it's not like if anybody sees more Trump being a bully coverage, they're going to be like, well, that sealed the deal. Like he needs no exposure. By kind of not going, it turns this into the kids' table, the people who you don't have to think about that much. You're totally right that leaves Ron DeSantis as the next highest on the rung. That's who everyone's going to train their fire on. And it's not like he has to be there to kind of like keep them in line, because even in his absence, when the other people inevitably get asked about his indictments, they're going to put out the same kind of mealy mouthed stuff they've been serving up on the campaign trail. They're going to get asked about January 6th, and they're going to say something like, well, should he have been more careful with his language? Maybe, but well, he didn't go in. You know what I mean? And that's going to
You
be
can't
like the
criminalize
harshest thing we're going
politics.
to
And
get.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
There's literally no upside to him going, and I think the only thing that would motivate him to go is his pathological need for attention and love of being in the spotlight and on the TV at all times. But he's been able to kind of slake that thirst in other venues, like not going on normal news shows anymore and stuff like that. So yeah, I think the chances of him showing up are like microscopic. But you're gonna have this like steroided up Chris Christie who's like going out there ready to, aim to kill. And who's going to be there but like small little Ron DeSantis?
Yeah, it's funny. One thing that came out, there was this Times article that time is dilated these days, and I lose track of the how much time has passed. I think it was just this last weekend, so 3 or 4 days ago. This Times article that talked some about the financial problems, although before this big bloodletting last night, broke some news about that first of the crazy videos and so forth. One of the things, and about the private jets. One of the things that just got mentioned in passing was that DeSantis is used to running under the Florida rules. And under the Florida rules, I think they have something like close to unlimited giving. Maybe there's some limits, but the point is that if you got a few billionaires in your corner, you're good to go. They can
Mm.
basically. I don't know if it's directly giving to your campaign. Sometimes there is it's looser what third party groups can be. One way or another, a few high rollers can set you up, and there's no restrictions on flying the loaner private jets. So basically, you can just zoom around the state on the private jet, and you've got a few billionaire donors, and you're good to go. So operating under the federal rules, and I don't know. I should know this. I guess I think it's still, if some billionaire just loans you their private jet, that's cool, but it's a donation. I don't know exactly. In any case, it doesn't work like it does in Florida, and that is a problem for him. And one of the other things that came up in that, well, not came up in that article, but came up in the stories overnight, is that some of the senior people on the campaign who were let go, they were let go from the campaign, but they weren't booted out of DeSantis world altogether. They were basically hived off to the super PAC. And remember, all of these stories about, DeSantis has raised $100 million, or I think originally it was $130 million. That's the super PAC, and I think there may even be more than one super PAC. Most candidates these days have a couple of them, and but that's the key. So they're going to the super PAC where there's still a ton of money, and of course, the key with the super PACs is, you get a few billionaires who each kick in like $20 million, and you're good to go, right? There's no limits, and so you have each of these things, and at least to my mind, I mean, look, as I mentioned in a post a few days ago, I'm not a big fan of flying in general. Even apart from the sort of the lack of leg room. But I get it. I'm sure flying on a private jet looks fun on Succession, right? So it's not that you have to be some sort of freak to want to fly in a private jet, but I do think you have a tying together of all these threads that to have a mass donor base, and usually when we talk small donors, generally speaking, small donors is upper middle class and more affluent people. It's not people who are like on minimum wage, although certainly a lot of those people do make small donations. But the real punch with small donations is a you know a young lawyer who kicks in $100, and since their limit is $3,300 or whatever it is, they can be kicking in $100 through the whole 2-year cycle, basically. In any case, the private jet, the lack of a mass donor base, trying to get all the donations from a few people, they're not people. The DeSantises. That's sort of the thread that that loops everything kind of loops everything together, and it's causing them problems now, because again, another point was made in that Times article, is that the key with small donors, which is almost by definition online through like Act Blue or Win Red or whatever, that just comes in, right? You send out emails, you do Zooms or something like that. But when you're getting money from the richies, the big, the large, you have to go meet them in person. So they're having to go around the country to these fundraisers more than other candidates would. And since they'll only fly on private jets, it's costing them a ton of money to raise the money, because they're flying around in the private jets. And presumably now they're gonna come down to our level and fly Delta or fly JetBlue, or I mean, you can tell, since I'm not a big flyer, the names of the different airlines don't necessarily come to mind to me. But it's a problem, and it shouldn't have. Oh, one other thing, and sorry for hogging the mic here. Something that a Florida Democratic Florida political operative mentioned this to me on Twitter a couple days ago, which must be known information, but it hadn't registered to me, that obviously a huge amount has been made of the fact that DeSantis had such a storming reelection victory, like 60-40, which is unheard of in a pretty contested state. I guess that DeSantis like outspent Charlie Crist by like 10-1.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean that Crist would have won. I mean, I assume one of the reasons that Crist wasn't able to raise a lot of money is because people didn't think he had a chance. But that did tell me something, because if you're getting outspent 10-1, that can take like a 53-47 race and make it a 60-40 race if you're
Mhm.
just, you're just sort of blown out of the water like that. So anyway, all the different ways we can stamp on Ron DeSantis' political grave while he's still, twitching and fiddling as he bleeds out.
And
There you go.
doing debate prep.
Debate prep. Yeah, no, that's
Yep.
going to be fun. And that's the thing. He's not a great debater.
Yeah.
So it's not even like he's like, yeah, they're coming at me, man, but I'm coming. I'm,
I know
I'm, you know,
that really is like such a problem for him because you have a skill set like Trump's where he's really good at like media manipulation and kind of knowing what plays well on TV, or you have a skill set like Biden's, which is kind of the retail politicky, like person to person, small event, emotional moments kind of skill set. And then Ron DeSantis's skill set is like signing super right wing pieces of legislation, which is like not all that transferable to the campaign trail.
right. Well, it reminds me because George W. Bush, at least on points, was a pretty bad debater.
Hmm.
What got lost a lot was that debates generally are not scored on points, not really,
Right.
right? But what he was able to do, so I think we all know he had a lot of the aw shucks, he's just like us kind of thing going for him. But one of the things he had going for him during the primaries in 2000 was everybody's attacking him, and he could just say like, "Well, I guess I do kind of suck," and just these kind of just these kind of things that you'd say, you know, but it was because he was ahead, right? And you can just sort of like you can just say something like that when you're ahead, and everybody's like, that, he deflected that pretty well. Um, but when you're not ahead, you can't you can't really do that, right? You've got to you've got to fight for your space, and he doesn't really have that. So, which I think what it tells us is that it's going to be a lot of fun watching this debate, assuming his campaign lasts until the end of August.
All
But
right.
yeah, there you go. So I think he'll be in it. But I'm telling you, man, he's it's we don't deserve something this good as the implosion of Ron DeSantis's campaign. Although we will pay for it in the fact that even though I think and have some relative confidence that Joe Biden will beat Donald Trump, by no means is it a sure thing.
Totally.
And that just the very real chance that Donald Trump could be elected again is we will more than pay for the joy of DeSantis's implosion. In any case, that is about all we have for this episode, I think. And let me remind you that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. Get 25% off any order with the promo code TPM if you go to Grady'sColdBrew.com. Again, promo code TPM at Grady'sColdBrew.com. And I think that's all we got.
All right. See you next week.
Later.
Bye.